Okay, so your mom has asked me to talk about the Pilgrims and about your ancestors that were the Pilgrims. So, I can't remember how was it you that I asked for your phone or something? I can't remember. But so I looked up the Hanson side too, and it turns out that both sides descend from the same people. So as I talk about this will be the Hanson and the Robertson side, okay? I've always loved the Pilgrims, and I've come to appreciate them even more. As I've studied my scripture this year, I've realized how vitally important they were to the gathering of Israel. If you remember and this is just your grandma's thinking, in the Old Testament, when Israel said to Samuel, we want a king, we want a king, we want to be like other nations, we don't want to have God be our king. We don't want God to be our protector, we don't want him to fight our battles, blah, blah, blah. We want a king with an army. And then when it talks about the restoration of the gospel, it always prefaces it with, they'll remember Christ, and then there's a restoration. I'm like, no, that doesn't quite happen. Then it occurred to me, it was the Pilgrims that remembered Christ and chose him over the King of England, because the King of England had passed laws that people that didn't belong to his church, which was the Church of England, would either be fined, imprisoned, and some of them were killed if they didn't go to his church. How would you like that if America had a king and he said, you have to go to my church or else I'm going to fine you, and the fine was $1 shilling for every meeting that you missed, or I'm going to put you in jail, or I might kill you even if you don't worship in my church. Well, they didn't believe his church. They had their own church. They were called separatists because they had separated from the Church of England. And so they were in so much trouble and having so many problems that they decided to go to Holland. So I have a few pictures here that I've gathered. They went to Holland in about 1608, and maybe I'll just open this up. So here's London, England, and they went over to Halden, to Leiden. So that's not very far away, is it? And they lived there, and they were pretty happy there. It was a very prosperous port city, and they liked it. But they'd been there about 10 years, and what do you think their children were doing? Were they speaking English, or do you think they were speaking Dutch? They started speaking Dutch, and they started acting like the Dutch people, and they didn't like that. They wanted their children to be English. They loved England. They just didn't want to belong to the Church of England. So then some of them came back to England, and they came up with the plan to go to America, and we have a little background music. So this was their plan, and some of them, when they decided to come to America, some of them came from Holland right then. Some of them had come earlier, and they had 2 ships. Does anyone know the name of the ships? One was the Mayflower. I think it's a smaller one, and one was the Speedwell. And this Mayflower was a cargo ship. It wasn't a passenger ship. And the Speedwell was going to carry the people, and the Mayflower was going to carry all the supplies. So they set out in September. They were late getting started. Maybe they set out earlier. They finally left on September 16th, but the 2 ships departed on August 5th, and they got out about 500 miles and the speedwell was just leaking. So they came back to Dartmouth, and there's the 2 boats in the Dartmouth harbor, and they repaired the speedwell and set out again, and it was just leaking. And so they turned around again, and by this time, the people that had come from Holland had been on the boat how long already? And they'd gone out and back and out and back. So they had already been on the ship for a long time. Anyway, they decided that the speedwell was not going to be able to be used. And so they turned around, went back to England, and all of the ones that decided to go, some of them stayed. A lot of them said, we're done now, and some of them said, no, well, there just wasn't room for all of them either on the Mayflower. They ended up with 102 passengers. Here's a list on the Mayflower. And here's a picture. This is an actual picture. No, it's not. It's an artist render of them loading up everything that they could onto the Mayflower and getting it ready to go. So they finally departed. You'll find different dates because they changed calendars, whether you're going by the Julian calendar or the Gregorian calendar. But they left on September 16th, which is by our calendar today, which is fairly late. It's in the stormy season. That's when you'll notice the hurricanes and all the big storms across the Atlantic happen after that time. So they got onto the ship, they got going. The first month of October wasn't bad at all. It was sunny and nice, and they did a good job getting there. But then storms came. Grandpa and I, when Rebecca was 1, we went back and saw Plymouth Plantation, and we saw the Mayflower 2 ship, which is a reconstruction of Mayflower. And that ship was so small, wasn't it, Jim?
Yes, it was. I said to Judy, I can imagine, as a pioneer, being asked to put everything I could carry into a handcart and pulling the handcart. But I could not imagine getting onto that boat to cross the ocean.
To cross the ocean. You had, every family had a space about the size of our dinner table as it is right now. That was your space to sleep as a family. Now, admittedly, most of them only brought 1 or 2 children. They didn't bring a lot of children, but still, it was so crowded. And then when the storms came, they were locked down in the here's a diagram of the Mayflower. You can see it's not a big ship. It is a small ship. And you think of 102 passengers shut up down in there and about 30 crew members. That's a lot of people for this small ship. Anyway, they all got seasick. They were locked down in there. They couldn't go up because they would be washed off the ship. And so what do you think they did? They were throwing up because they were so seasick. You couldn't open the door. You didn't have any way to wash anything. They had stale bread, and at this time, what they had to drink was beer, and it was sour. So they only had pretty crappy food to eat at this point of the journey, and it was really an extremely hard thing that they did. So here is, the storms took them off course, and this is where they had gotten a patent to go to Virginia Colony. This map is lying to you. That's Virginia as it's shaped today. This is a map showing you how Virginia was shaped then. See how it goes way up into all this area. So where they were headed was Hudson Bay, which is, I've drawn a line to the correct spot on the map. That's where they wanted to go. But the storms blew them off course, and they ended up getting into Cape Cod, which is this small little, right there. See that kind of hook? right there. So that's where they ended up landing. This is a reconstructed Mayflower. Here is what the main area looked like. And you can see that there's a little bed there and a bed there. There's just all these little beds building against the wall. And that's where each family had their own little bed. Unbelievable, huh? Huge sacrifice. So they got to Cape Cod. They realized they were not where they needed to be, and it caused a big problem because some of the crew said, hey, this is under the control of England. This is not under the control of England. We don't have to be subject to the king anymore. We can do whatever we want. We don't have to pay. They had borrowed a lot of money to finance the trip. And they said, we don't have to pay back our debtors. There's no law here. So what do you think they did about that? Does anybody know? Jonathan, do you know what they did?
Is it the Mayflower Compact?
You're right. They came up with the Mayflower Compact. And once again, this is from William Bradford's journal, how he recorded the Mayflower Compact. So that's in his writing. And this is an actual photograph. No, it's not. Of them signing the Mayflower Compact. But in this artist rendition, the guy who's signing it is John Alden. And you'll notice his hat. Why do you think he has a striped hat? He doesn't look like the Pilgrims. That's the kind of hat the Pilgrims wore. Do you guys know who John Alden was? He's kind of a famous pilgrim. He wasn't a pilgrim. We'll get to his story later. But anyway, this is a picture of him signing the Mayflower Compact. And the awesome thing about the Mayflower Compact is it is like the Declaration of Independence from the king, sort of. It's like we will rule ourselves. And everybody has to get along. The majority rules. They didn't select somebody to be the ruler of the community. They didn't select a king. They said, we will follow the rules of the king and pay our bills back, but the majority will rule. Okay? So it was the basis for our Constitution. So those people started what is the basis for our Constitution. So they landed, and here's a little, again, actual photograph of the ship in the harbor. They had this little boat that then they could go exploring in, but they had to take it apart to fit it onto the Mayflower. So they had to spend a few days reconstructing it before they could go anywhere. So here's a map of Cape Cod. And the first thing they did was they kind of explored all around to see where the best place to settle would be, because they decided to stay and not. They had first tried to go down to Hudson Bay, but there were so many. Do you know what a shoal is? A shoal is under the water, so you can't see it, but it's where the land is very close to the surface. So your ship could be totally broken up by hitting it. And there were too many shoals, and it was still stormy, and they just decided we cannot make it to Hudson Bay. So they decided to stay there. And this is a map showing where they explored the different places. And this is where they ended up staying, is over here. They found this little kind of more protected cove area, and that's where they ended up choosing to stay. And the reason they chose to stay there was because all along here they found various Indian settlements that they were very fortunate because their food was all rotten. And they found dried corn and dried beans in some of these Indian settlements. And they just took it and they said, we'll pay them back when we can, but they were starving. So they had to have the food. But they got over to this area, and there had been an Indian village there. It was all clear, and they knew that they must have died of disease because there were lots of graves, but then they also found some skeletons of the final people who died that nobody was there to bury them. And it turned out what we learned later was it was basically smallpox that had wiped out that village. So, and there was grain stored there. So there was corn and there was some food still stored there. So that is where they decided to build their village. And so then they started building, they lived on this, they stayed on the ship. Most of them stayed on the ship, the women and the children. And the men went back and forth and started building. But they had scurvy. They all got a horrible cough. They all got very sick. And at one point, there were only 7 of them well enough to take care of everybody else. But they had to build houses, and they had to be, it was a terrible situation. They finally got to go to shore. So this is a picture of how many actually were on the Mayflower by their family name. And you see that family had 3 children, but this shows each of the different families with showing the husband and the wife and the children. Okay? At the end of the first winter, do you know how many were still alive?
100.
Only the ones in black were still alive. All the ones that are gray died during the first winter. And of all the moms, the wives that came, by the end of the first winter, do you know how many moms were still alive? Only 4. So at the first Thanksgiving, there were only 4 of the original women who landed still alive. So that's quite a shocking little map, isn't a picture, isn't it? So that many were on the boat when they left. 1 baby was born on the ocean. 1 baby was born on the Mayflower while it was still in port before they had gotten to land. But over half of them died that first winter. So, they finally, this is a picture of, in April, they came ashore. There's another picture of them coming ashore with the Mayflower still there. But this is a picture when the Mayflower's leaving, and the Mayflower left in April. And they could have gotten back on the Mayflower and said, we're done. But they didn't, they stayed. Do you guys know who saved their life? And your mom will probably teach you about this. And it was Squanto, one of the Indians. Yeah, you'll learn about Squanto. But he was the one that saved their lives. And here's a picture of the first Thanksgiving. Here's, this is a drawing of what they built. Now, they didn't have this much built at the end of the first winter. They had 4 houses built, the common houses, and then this is who lived in each of the houses. So, and now they have rebuilt this, and Grandpa and I visited this, and this is what Plymouth Plantation looks like today. And you can go visit it and see what it looks like, which we did. We went there, and it was super fun and awesome. And at that point, I thought, Grandpa was descended from John Alden and Priscilla Mullins. Remember when I said that was a picture of John Alden signing? Well, he is Grandpa's 10th great-grandfather. So he's your mom's 11th great-grandfather and your 12th great-grandfather. John Alden and Priscilla Mullins. I threw that away and now I need it. Where's the one with all the people that died? Right here. So, this is Priscilla Mullins, and all her family that came died. She had an older brother in England that came later, but she was left completely alone. So, this is John Alden, and he was not a separatist. We'll learn about him in just a minute, but he and Priscilla Mullins got married.
Who's Priscilla's dad?
Uh-huh.
Who's Priscilla's dad?
William Mullins.
So that William is from
John's.
yeah.
Yeah. I was just surprised that it's so basically the same families on both our sides. Anyway, so we went to visit Plymouth Plantation, and it looks like this. And I knew that Grandpa was descended from John Alden and Priscilla Mullins, and I thought I knew that I was descended from Edward Doty, and that'd been researched by a really good genealogist, so I was pretty sure of it. So what happened was we went to, this is a picture of John Alden's house, a reconstruction of it there, and they have actors that live in the houses. And here's the actor. This is somebody else visiting there, of course. But we could interview our ancestor. They've
researched their character very thoroughly.
They knew their character very well. So we could ask him all kinds of questions. And it was like going and interviewing your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. You know, it was super cool. So this is inside of his cabin. And these are not pictures we took. I couldn't find our pictures, except for these two. And this is the house that John Alden and Priscilla Mullins later built in Duxbury. And that's a picture of their graves. They had 11 children. So we went and interviewed him. And it was a sweet little couple that first one's married in America. And they had 11 children, and they really were very good. So then we went to look up my ancestor, Edward Doty, and he was an indentured servant, and he wasn't there that day, so we couldn't interview him. But the lady who was his mistress, mistress, what do you say? Mistress, I guess.
An indentured servant was a servant for another family. And
it
so
was basically a step above a slave. You had to do what they said, and you owed them, and you had to do what they say. But she was the one that he was indentured to. And she said, he was such an embarrassment. He started the first fight in America, and he was the first man put in the stocks. And I thought, of course, my ancestor would be the first one to start the fight and end up in the stocks, and Grandpa's ancestor would be the cute little couple that was perfect and has the epic poem written by William Wordsworth about and immortalized forever, you know. The only problem with that story is, so that's what I thought at the time. The thing about genealogy is, guess what? It's constantly changing. So, it turns out that Grandpa is descended from John Alden, and I've written a little semi-history. Here's a little actual photograph of John Alden and Priscilla Mullins. And I showed you the houses. Anyway, they really were an awesome couple. But the way John Alden got onto the Mayflower was they had stopped at Southampton to get some more supplies the Mayflower had in England, and the captain of the ship just found him on the street, basically, and said, do you want to go with us? we're hiring crew members. So he was a member of the crew. He was a cooper. Does anyone know what a cooper is? What does a cooper do? He doesn't raise
His
hogs.
dad was a cooper.
Barrel males. Yep. They make barrels, and barrels were very important to them then. Barrels were a necessity, and the ship needed a cooper. So he was hired, and he came as a member of the crew. I don't know how he then switched from not being, well, he married Priscilla, but he stayed. He did not go back when the ship left. He didn't go back as a member of the crew. He stayed and became a very prominent member of the village, and just was a very good man. Anyway, so there's John Alden. Now, I will stop from my storytelling here a little bit and tell you how you find out if you are related to a pilgrim, which maybe you already know this. You can come stand around me if you want. So this is Family Search.
Okay, wait.